She thought her secret getaway would make her rich. But by the time she returned, everything she stole was already gone. The house was too quiet that evening, eerily so. The old grandfather clock ticked in the corner, each chime echoing against the polished oak floors like a countdown to something I couldn't quite name. Rain lashed against the windows, streaking them with cold silver trails, while the fire in the hearth burned low, throwing long shadows that reached for the walls. I sat there, fingers drumming against the mahogany armrest of my chair, eyes fixed on the unopened letter resting on the table. It was her handwriting, elegant, flowing and deceitful. She had left that morning, suitcase in hand, lips pressing a perfunctory kiss against my cheek, as though we were nothing more than business partners sharing a contract, not vows. Just a retreat, she had said. A wellness retreat for the mind and body, 3 days to reconnect with herself. But I knew better. I knew every retreat she had taken in the last 6 months was not about yoga, not about healing. They were rendezvous points, carefully chosen places where she could meet him without raising suspicion. And this time, it was different. This time, she hadn't just left for her lover. She had left with my future in her suitcase. The documents, the codes, the access to everything my father had built and entrusted to me. My inheritance, the one thing that connected me to my family legacy, was no longer safe. I rose from the chair and walked to the window. The rain had turned heavier, turning the garden outside into a slick, glistening web of mud and reflection. In the faint light of the street lamp, I saw my reflection staring back at me, tired, hollow-eyed, but not broken. Not yet. The signs had been there for months. Late-night texts she never explained, sudden trips to places I was too busy to join her, and a constant curiosity about my father's estate, always framed as innocent questions. But last week, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place when I overheard a hushed phone call, her voice dripping with excitement, whispering about the papers being signed soon and how he'll never know until it's too late. I did know, and I had acted before she even realized it. My father's will was ironclad, but the assets, those could move if the wrong documents were in the wrong hands. She thought she could transfer them, hide them in foreign accounts, and vanish with her lover into a world they had been quietly building behind my back. She thought she was clever. But betrayal is a dangerous game, and I had been watching longer than she knew. The letter on the table was her final play. No doubt, a carefully constructed lie to distract me while the retreat played out its true purpose. My fingers hovered above it, debating whether to open it now or later. But deep down, I already knew what it contained. A soft, scripted story about self-care, about needing space, perhaps even an apology laced with manipulation. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling like distant drums. My hand tightened on the edge of the table. I could feel the weight of my father's voice in my memory, stern, unwavering. Protect what's yours, son. Not everyone who smiles at you means well. He had been right. Upstairs, the safe lay empty, but not vulnerable. I had already moved the real documents, the real codes, weeks ago. What she had taken was a shadow, a decoy, a web carefully designed to ensnare her when the time came. And that time was drawing near. I sat back down and stared into the flames, watching them dance and writhe like hungry spirits. Somewhere across the city, she was laughing, clinking glasses with the man who thought he was clever enough to steal what generations had built. Perhaps she believed tonight was the start of her new life, a life where I was nothing more than a name in her past. But she'd underestimated me. The retreat would last 3 days. The moment she signed those papers, the trap would spring, not on me, but on them. Their accounts would be frozen. The documents would lead them to nothing but dead ends, and the people they thought were allies would reveal themselves for what they truly were. My hands in the dark. The rain whispered against the windows, like 1,000 tiny conspirators applauding the plan already set in motion. I reached for my glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and let the bitter warmth slide down my throat. Revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet, patient thing, waiting for its moment to bloom. In that moment, I felt something shift within me. Not anger, not sadness, but a cold resolve. I would not confront her with shouting or violence. No, I would let her walk into her own downfall, believing she was the predator when she was, in fact, the prey. Tomorrow, the first thread of the plan would tighten. A phone call here, a message there. By the time she returned, she would find the world had changed. Her lover absent, her accounts empty, her lies exposed. And when she looked at me, searching for the fool she thought she married, she would find only silence and a faint smile. The night dragged on, the storm showing no sign of letting up. I sat there until the fire burned low, the letter still unopened, the glass empty, and the plan ready to unfold. Some betrayals demand forgiveness, others demand consequence. This was the latter. The morning arrived cloaked in grey. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick and the sky heavy with the scent of wet earth. I sat at the breakfast table, the same one where we had shared countless quiet mornings, sipping coffee as though the world hadn't begun to unravel. The letter from last night lay open now, its words an intricate dance of affection and deception. Dearest, it began, a word she rarely used in recent years. I know you've been busy with your work and your family obligations, and I felt it best to give us both some space to breathe. This retreat is about healing, about finding myself again. When I return, we'll talk about our future, about what we really want. There it was, soft, deliberate, and poisonous. No mention of the accounts, the documents, the sudden urgency she had shown in recent weeks to help with my late father's estate. Just a gentle suggestion that perhaps when she returned the future might look different, one where I would willingly let her go, and with her, everything that was mine. I folded the letter neatly, as though tucking away an old receipt, and placed it beside my plate. My appetite was gone. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice before a rough voice answered. Yes? It's me, I said quietly. She's in motion, a pause. Then we're ready? Proceed as planned. No loose ends. There was no need for more words. This was not about rage anymore. It was about precision. By mid-morning, the first move had been played. A trusted associate visited the retreat under the guise of a delivery. A bouquet of white lilies, her favourite, with a note she would recognise immediately. For every lie, a petal falls. Subtle, unsettling, enough to make her wonder who was watching. Meanwhile, my lawyers moved silently, freezing the accounts she thought were within her reach. The digital fingerprints she had so carelessly left behind led them not to hidden wealth, but to a maze of false pathways I had created weeks ago. Every email, every transaction was now a string leading nowhere. She called me that evening. Her voice was soft, too soft, almost rehearsed. How are you? I just wanted to check in. It's raining here too. Everything's fine, I replied, keeping my tone calm. Enjoy your retreat. There was a pause on her end. She wasn't expecting calm. She was expecting distance, maybe frustration, a sign that her plan was working. But I gave her nothing, only silence where she craved chaos. Later that night, I drove to the old estate, my father's home, now mine by law, but not yet by legacy. The hallways smelled of cedar and memory. His study remained untouched, the shelves lined with leather-bound books, the clock on the mantel frozen since the day he passed. I sat in his chair, the same one where he had taught me that trust was a currency more fragile than gold. People will smile at you, he had said once, eyes sharp beneath his thick brows. And some will mean it, but some will be waiting to count your coins while you sleep. How right he had been. From the study window, I saw the fields stretching, out, glistening under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, my betrayer, was sipping wine with him, the man she believed would deliver her freedom. They didn't know that the freedom they plotted was a cage of their own making. The second move came the next day, a forged message, sent from an account she believed was her lover's. It hinted at doubt, at betrayal within betrayal. A seed of paranoia planted between them. Lovers built on deceit seldom survive the taste of their own medicine. By the end of that day, her calls grew more frequent, more frantic. "Did you change the accounts? I can't access." "Strange," I said, softly. "I'll look into it when you return." She didn't press further, not yet, but I could feel the threads tightening. On the third night, I visited our usual restaurant, the place we always went when pretending to be the perfect couple. I sat at our table, ordered her favorite wine, and left a single envelope with the waiter. No name, no sender, just her initials on the front. Inside, a photograph of us on our wedding day, and beneath it, a single line in my handwriting. "Every vow broken will find its echo." By now, she would know I was aware. The storm outside had passed, but another brewed in the distance, one of consequence. This wasn't just about the money, the inheritance, the documents. It was about something deeper, the erosion of trust, the theft of years I could never reclaim. I wasn't a man given to melodrama, but I was my father's son, and my father never left debts unsettled. On the fourth morning, her messages stopped. No calls, no letters, only silence. That told me one thing. The trap had been sprung, and she was scrambling, perhaps even doubting the very man she had chosen over me. As I stood in the doorway of my study, the sun finally broke through the clouds, spilling golden light across the floorboards. I tightened my grip on the railing. The game was shifting now. The retreat had 2 more days to run, but I knew her well enough to predict the next step. She would come home early, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that the empire she had built on lies was already crumbling, and, when she did, the reckoning would begin. The house felt different that night, quieter, though every clock ticked with a kind of feverish anticipation. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with the remnants of rain, carrying the scent of wet leaves through the open window. I stood at the threshold of the hallway, lights dimmed, listening. A car engine hummed outside, then stopped. Tires crunched against the gravel. My hand tightened around the railing. She had returned, not with the flourish of guiltless innocence, nor with the triumphant poise of a woman who had conquered her fears. No, she stepped into the house like a thief, afraid of her own shadow, coat drawn tight, hair damp, eyes darting from one corner to another. "You're home early," I said, my voice calm, almost welcoming. Her lips parted, the faintest trace of a smile twitching at the corners, though it never reached her eyes. "I missed home," she murmured, setting her bag down with forced casualness. Missed home, or missed control? She glanced at the table, at the unopened mail, at the place where once her presence dominated every room. Now, it felt foreign to her, as though the house itself had begun to whisper in my favor. "How was the retreat?" I asked, walking toward the kitchen. I poured 2 glasses of water, not wine. She noticed. "Peaceful," she said, her voice brittle. "Gave me time to think." I nodded. "And what conclusions did you reach?" She hesitated. The silence stretched between us, long enough for me to see the crack in her composure. Her hands clenched around her bag strap. "I realized we've both made mistakes." There it was, the first thread of manipulation cast like a fishing line into still water. Not an admission of guilt, not an apology. A shared responsibility, because guilt shared is guilt blurred. But I didn't bite. Instead, I handed her the glass and said, "Drink. You must be tired." She stared at it for a moment too long before taking a sip. Suspicion flickered behind her eyes. Good. Let her wonder. Later that evening, as she unpacked in our bedroom, I walked into the study. The envelope I had prepared lay waiting in the drawer. Inside was everything she feared. Copies of the forged documents she had sent to her lover, a ledger of every attempt she made to reroute the inheritance, and the false correspondence I had, orchestrated to make them question each other. This was the third move. Not a threat, but a mirror. I placed it on the nightstand beside her. No words, no confrontation, just a silent offering. She found it an hour later. The sound of paper rustling in the quiet house was almost poetic. A sharp inhale followed, the kind that precedes a lie or a confession. "You went through my things?" she asked from the doorway, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "No," I replied evenly. "Your things found their way to me." She stepped forward, letter in hand. "This isn't what it looks like." "It never is," I said. The mask cracked then. For a heartbeat, the veneer of elegance and charm she wore dissolved, revealing the calculating woman beneath. Her eyes hardened, her jaw tightened. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Truth," I said simply. She laughed. A hollow sound. "Truth? There is no truth in this house. Only power." And there it was, confession dressed in philosophy. The next morning, the house woke to a tension thicker than fog. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching familiar things as though reclaiming. Then, by memory, I let her. I wanted her to believe there was still ground beneath her feet before I pulled it away completely. My lawyers had sent another update. The forged accounts she had tried to access were now officially under investigation, not by police, but by private auditors. No legal stain yet, just enough to make the ground beneath her tremble. By noon, she tried her first counterattack. "Breakfast made," a soft apology murmured, a suggestion that perhaps we should start over. "You and we've been through so much. Maybe we can fix this." Fix. Such a fragile word, meant for broken dishes and torn hems, not for betrayal that had been carefully brewed like poison over years. I played along, nodding, asking gentle questions. "Where were you really these past weeks? Who was helping you draft those documents?" She feigned confusion. "Documents? I don't know what you mean." Lies still, even with the evidence laid bare beside her bed. On the second night after her return, the real crack came. I heard her in the study, whispering into her phone, her words hurried, sharp, fearful. She was calling him, her supposed savior. "I think he knows," she hissed. "Everything's falling apart. The money, the accounts. They're locked." "No, I don't know if it's permanent. We need to meet. Yes, soon. Before he—" The floorboard creaked beneath my foot as I stepped closer. She turned, eyes wide, phone clutched to her chest. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just a friend. A friend doesn't whisper in the dark." She said nothing. I let her pass, for now, because the fourth move was already set in motion. A meeting arranged not by her lover, but by me. A location chosen, a time sent, a promise of escape whispered. In the digital shadows. And when she arrived there, she would find only truth waiting. That night, as rain began to fall again, I stood at the window, watching droplets streak down the glass. The storm had returned, but this time it was mine. The rain was relentless, a steady curtain drumming against the windows as dawn crept over the horizon. The house was quiet, almost reverent, as though it too anticipated what was to come. I dressed, with deliberate calm, the kind that comes after months of waiting, plotting, and watching a web tighten around its prey. She was already awake. I could hear her footsteps pacing upstairs, then down the hall, the restless shuffle of someone who had run out of lies but not yet found the courage to confess. The envelope I left on her desk had done its work. Every letter, every number, every falsified account traced back to her. She hadn't slept well since finding it. Guilt does that. It keeps the eyes open and the mind restless, searching for exits that no longer exist. At 8 a.m., her phone rang. She didn't know I was in the study when she answered. Yes, she whispered urgently. Is he coming? Are you sure it's safe? I smiled in the dark. The call wasn't from her accomplice. It was from me, through the number I had given him to reconnect. He had already been given a choice: disappear with his silence or drown with her lies. He chose silence. By noon, I sent her a message. Meet me at the old conservatory, alone. The conservatory had always been a place of deception for her, a place where she plotted, whispered, and sowed seeds of control. It was fitting that it would now become the ground where truth was planted. She arrived in the late afternoon, raincoat draped over her elegant frame, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her eyes. The place was abandoned now, shattered glass, vines reclaiming marble floors, a roof that let the storm drip through in silver threads. You wanted to talk, she said, her voice trembling beneath its polished surface. I wanted to finish, I replied, stepping out from the shadows. Her eyes darted to the corners of the room. No one else was there. No savior, no partner. Only us. I know everything, I continued. The forged letters, the missing inheritance, the poisoned nights. You called dinners. I know what you tried to build and who you tried to destroy. She flinched. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove it. I only need you to feel it. I tossed the final envelope onto the broken table between us. Inside were the last nails for her coffin. A confession drafted by her lover, her own signatures stitched into the crime, and the financial trap now closing around her. Her hands trembled as she opened it, rain dripping from her sleeve. What do you want from me? She whispered. An end, I said. Not for me, for you. You built your kingdom on my silence. Now you will live with your ruin. She sank onto the bench, the rain dripping against her hair. The mask she had worn for years finally cracked completely. Tears. Not the ones she used to manipulate, but the real sharp kind, welled in her eyes. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. But you meant for it to start, I said. She buried her face in her hands. Please. I can fix this. I can make it right. It's too late to fix what was poisoned, I replied, turning toward the door. As I stepped into the rain, I didn't look back. There was no need. Her world was already collapsing, quietly, elegantly, without a single scream. The auditors would take care of the rest. Her partner would never return her calls. The inheritance would return to its rightful hands. By the time the first legal letters reached her, I would be gone. On a train, a new city, a new life. Not as a victim, not even as a victor, just as someone free. That evening, as the city lights blurred against the rain-slicked windows, I watched the world move on, without her shadow stretching across my future. There was no joy in her downfall, only relief. Revenge is never sweet. It's cleansing, like a storm that tears through the night and leaves the air sharp and cold. I thought of her once more, alone in the house, staring at the papers that had undone her. Perhaps she would learn what betrayal tastes like when served cold and patiently brewed, and perhaps, just perhaps, she would remember the night she poured the drink that started it all, because the reckoning wasn't a single moment. It was every second she underestimated me.